Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Love is in the Air, Wildlife Courtship Rituals, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Charlie Reinertsen. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Take it away, Charlie.
Thanks, Rob. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Today's special edition of the Daily Dose is going to feature some courtship rituals, but really it's just some fancy marketing to get you to come to Evolutionary Bio 101. Really, we're going to be talking about uh, creatures that I've been lucky enough to photograph throughout my career. And I'll talk to you about some of the amazing wildlife behaviors that I've observed. And we'll talk about how, uh, from an evolutionary standpoint, why do we have so many interesting courtship displays across the animal kingdom? And we're going to celebrate some of those today. So, if you've read anything about natural selection, if you've read anything from Darwin, you've come across the phrase survival of the fittest. And in ecology, we define the word fit differently than you might in day to day conversation. So, fitness is actually a measure of your ability to survive and reproduce. And so natural selection is this whole concept that individuals within a population have variations that exist for genetic differences that result in differences between those individuals. And organisms with variations are more adapted to their environment, are more likely to survive and pass on genes that confer benefits to their offspring. So distilling that into everyday language, uh, an individual within a population. So, say there's a population of 100 turtles, and 90 of those turtles, by and large, have the same characteristics, but 10 of those turtles have a mutation. And that mutation in their gene created variation in the hardness of their shell. And at some point in the future, in their environment, uh, those harder shelled turtles were slightly at a competitive advantage, so their fitness was a little higher, meaning they had more young, they were more successful at reproducing. That is how eventually, across many generations of selective change like that, you can have the process of evolution. Now, don't worry, this will be an exciting talk because we're going to talk about some specific examples of animals that, on face value, if you look at them and you look at their morphology or how their body type is presenting, you start to wonder, how did this animal end up this way? How is this a competitive advantage? When you look at elk in this picture, taken at the National Elk Refuge in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, you look at their morphology, you look at the males, and they have these antlers that can be 60 pounds on their heads. And you start to wonder, how is that a competitive advantage? How did the process of natural selection end up favoring individuals who had these antlers on their head? Well, a big driver behind natural selection is a subset of categories which fit under sexual selection. And that's the big focus of today's talk is how are animals adapted to be able to win the interest of a mate. And this is one of the greatest driving forces of natural selection and of evolutionary biology. So this is going to be oversimplified. We're not going to go into all the nuances. I'm sure that my evolutionary biology instructor will be very frustrated when he sees how much I've simplified. But for the purposes of today's fairly lighthearted chat, we're going to talk about the equation. By and large, the different areas on which there's selective pressure to evolve. Those areas are behavior. What behaviors does an animal engage in? Their morphology, so the physical appearance of the individual. And the other one we're going to put in a category of pheromones because this plays a huge role in sexual selection. Pheromones are essentially these chemicals that are sent and received by animals in the animal kingdom, and they're used for a lot of different communication purposes. Uh, and overall, a potential mate can evaluate another potential mate based on these collection of items. So let's take a look at an example. Here we have the painted turtle. And this painted turtle, Chrysemys picta, picta refers to the beautiful striped colors that this painted turtle has. And this particular turtle is a male turtle, and I know that because I remember this species. You can't tell based on this picture, but if you were to get a close look at their fingernails, you would see that the males have extraordinarily long fingernails. And that is because they use those fingernails in a courtship ritual in which they reach out and they flutter their fingernails against the face of the potential mate. And if the potential mate likes the length of the fingernails and the coloration of that turtle, they will then mate. And so this is a quick video just showing that fluttering technique. This can be a great way to start your date tonight. And these turtles are um, also have a component that interacts with pheromones. So let me go back. Um, the female turtle will actually release pheromones to attract males to then come and perform for her. And she'll evaluate them based on their, again, fingernail length, coloration. And you might be wondering, okay, so from an evolutionary standpoint, how did we get here? And fingernails are made up of keratin, and that's a protein. And so if you can generate really long fingernails, means that you have a lot of protein buildup, and so you're a healthy individual. Similar, and this is going to be a theme, kind of a drumbeat throughout the animal kingdom, is that richer, deeper colors are also going to denote, hey, I'm a very healthy individual. I have a great diet, and I can be a great genetic representative to be able to uh, have offspring with you. So that's the general idea behind the whole premise is, and in most instances in the animal kingdom, the female has greater choice over who she's going to mate with, and she's making the decision. So often you'll have what's called sexual dimorphism. So where one member of the species, one gender, has many more of these sexual pressures to be able to have change in morphology that has uh, coloration or patterning or some modification that's attractive that the other sex is using to be able to determine if they're a good potential father to their children. So, in the instance of turtles, they are only gravid at certain points in time. So they're only going to have eggs that can be carried through to term only so many times, and so they're going to be choosy about which male they're going to mate with. Now, bison are a species that takes the pheromone game to a whole nother level. And so you can see here, this picture was taken during the rut, which is a period of time when bison are uh, mating and about to mate and thinking about mating, and where that's driving a lot of their activity, which is basically August, September, October every year. And this male, you can see his purple tongue is sticking out and it's going into his nose. Inside their nose, like up in that the roof of their mouths is what's called a vomeronasal nasal organ, and that organ is exclusively uh, picking up on pheromone scents. And through pheromones, these chemicals, which are basically kind of like hormones, um, are communicating the health of individuals to one another. And so it's kind of like pulling a full medical report. So you'll often see bison trailing, male bison trailing a cow bison. And if she starts to urinate, that male bison will go in and actually drink the urine. And what they're doing is getting a full whiff into their vomeronasal organ to be able to get as clear of a picture of the health and how receptive that individual might be to mating. So, the other thing that these male bison are going to be doing, and this is not a male bison, I'm looking now, you can look at the horn curvature based on how tight or how wide it is. But anyway, males will also create these wallowing pits where they will roll out in the sagebrush flats. They'll create this area where it's devoid of all vegetation. It's just this dust pit. They'll urinate in that pit and they'll roll in it and they'll coat themselves in their scent, and then they'll parade around and advertise their own health to their mates. I don't suggest doing that tonight. Uh, Another kind of interesting area of study for evolutionary biology is the study of monogamy. And this is an area where some species will mate for life or have a partner for multiple consecutive years. And one of the species that does this is the trumpeter swan. And often we see this happen when the young are going to need a greater level of parental care. So in this instance, trumpeter swans lay very few eggs when they're gravid, and it takes a while for that egg to develop into hatchling and fledge. And so it takes both parents to be able to build the nest, lay the eggs, care for the young hatchling, and defend against predators. And so this is a picture of two trumpeter swans in the winter. They're spending their time together as a mating pair, even when they're not taking care of young. They're still just the two of them. Another example of amazing courtship behavior, if you ever get the opportunity to see this, it's pretty spectacular, is in the corvid family. Ravens have really amazing courtship displays. So males will compete for the interest of a female, and they'll have these elaborate flight patterns and displays. And ultimately, similar to a number of other raptor species, if the female decides that she's interested in this individual, they'll grab talons and fall through the air, kind of in the somersaulting pattern, which is really amazing. I don't have any pictures of that. um, there are a lot of the examples that we see about courtship rituals are in birds, and birds are great examples of sexual dimorphism, where the males often are very extravagant, have these amazing adaptations to strut their health in front of a potential mate. Um, and this particular bird is a dusky grouse. It has that orange patch over the eye. But a close relative of the dusky grouse has a really amazing mating display. And I'm not sure if the sound will come through, but we'll just take a look. This is a sage grouse in full display. And that's not my footage. That is uh, as the abcbirds.org. But that is a sage, a grouse that is lekking. And you can see it has this huge vocal sac that inflates and creates this popping noise. And if you've ever heard it in person, it's one of those sounds that kind of goes right through your chest. And based on the quality of that sound, on the noise that it makes, the potential mate will evaluate whether or not this is a bird that they want to mate with. And sage grouse leks are areas where many sage grouse will be doing this activity, displaying for one female. There will be a bunch of males all gathered up. And it's this pretty spectacular thing. And once again, that vocal sac serves no purpose other than to confer that individual a better chance at getting to have offspring. And for the female to be able to decide who's going to be able to be the father of her babies. So we have examples of this across all of the various different uh, kingdoms and in the animal kingdom. And so we have this in the insect order. We have monarch butterflies have spectacular courtship rituals. I'm actually going to pull up a video just really quickly here. It's just going to have to make me share different screen. So this is footage that I took while in uh, the wintering grounds of the monarch butterfly, which it's in the Transvolcanic Mountains in central Mexico. Excuse me. And I'm just going to play a few clips here and then we're going to slow it down and see if we can actually, there's a really brief behavior that I want to make sure that we see. Let me just bump up the quality. That might not be possible with the streaming as well. Try that. So it might be a little bit choppy, but when we get to the point that I want to freeze frame, I'll do that. At this point in the season, this was taken around March, early March. Monarch butterflies have been overwintering in this area in a very specific climate to try and preserve energy before coming back into North America and in mostly throughout the United States. And uh, at this point in time, they're shifting over to begin mating. So if you're in the monarch butterfly mating grounds at this point, you might be able to see this behavior. But right after this scene where they're mating, I'm going to point something out in the sky. So right here, if you see my cursor, I'm on the lower third of the screen on the bottom left. We're going to do this a couple times because it's pretty hard to see. And I didn't even know that I captured this until I was reviewing the footage. Watch that little dot. It's going to fly away. That is two monarch butterflies stuck together. So we're just going to watch that one more time. Follow my cursor. They kind of tumble down out of frame. And what's happening there is called the nuptial flight. And essentially, oh, and there's another one right there. I didn't even remember that that footage had another one, so that you'll actually see a little bit better here. Follow my cursor. So that is a male butterfly copulating with a female, and they attach on the ground, and then the male will take her on a flight up to a branch where uh, they will spend. I'm going to switch to my initial presentation. It's just going to take a second. I'll finish that story once I get my presentation back up. Doesn't like to switch between these screens, so just give me a second. Leave you with that cliffhanger of story. All right, back to the presentation. There. So those monarch butterflies boy. It's really giving me a run for my money. It won't let me backslash. Going through it all. Just a second. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the beginning of this presentation. Every once in a while, the technology defeats me. All right, we're going to share there. Play from current slide. Here we go. All right. So those monarch butterflies, there's a reason for why they do that flight. So the male is going to hold on to that female for as long as possible for a couple reasons. There's a really important thing happening, and it's related to the fact that this is a migratory butterfly. These butterflies flew all the way from the reaches of southern Canada 4,000 miles down to this very specific place to overwinter in central Mexico. And in the springtime, the final job of the males of that generation is to mate. And in the process of mating, they actually provide what's called a spermatophore. So that's sperm as well as this huge protein and sugar packed gift that powers the female's flight. And now she's pregnant. So the pregnant female's flight from the wintering grounds up into the beginning of their migration. And then there's a 4 to 5 generation migrational uh, uh, shift to the north throughout the season before they turn back around and come back. So it's really spectacular. I mean, I've done whole webinars just on that topic. I'm kind of stuttering over myself because I'm deciding how geeky to get into it because there's so much there. But the general premise is that even in insects, all of these evolutionary pressures are being placed on these individuals. So no matter where you look in the animal kingdom, there's going to be some examples of sexual competition that has led to some very interesting uh, adaptations and potentially courtship rituals. So here we're looking at another example behaviorally is competition. So when we look at these species here, upper left, that's elk, top right, that's bison, lower right, that's moose, lower left, that's a really young bighorn sheep. And as you know, when they get adult males, get these huge horns that wrap around. All of these species are going to compete and joust to be able to win the favor of females. And in particular, elk are really interesting because they're going to collect a harem. So just one bull is during the rut is going to collect as many females as possible, protect them from other bulls by sparring, by fighting, um, and mate with that entire group of female elk. And you're seeing here, this is in the winter, the males don't care about being together. In fact, they spend a lot of time together in this time because they're no longer competing for the interest of the females. So all of these species have pretty heavy competition. They all go into what's called the rut. And lastly, I just wanted to share a little bit that what our eyes can perceive of this whole evolutionary battle, we're very limited in what we can perceive. And there are a lot of species that can see wavelengths that we're not able to see, or perceive smells like pheromones that we're not able to perceive. And so birds in particular, many of which can see ultraviolet light. And so there's some really interesting visualizations of what it looks like when you see a bird through ultraviolet light. And some of the birds that we think are very drab in appearance are actually incredibly patterned or colorful to their mates. So there's always more beneath the surface. Just a couple pictures here to close out. If you enjoyed the storytelling today, you can find my conservation photography project, the Northern Peatlands Project, by visiting twoline.com/Pete. I've got to update that link. Tracks will get you there, but twoline.com/Pete. and you can sign up for a semi-monthly newsletter. I've been really busy with work lately, so this is just an extra project that I love to do when I have time. So you can check out some of my stories there. And feel free to send me an email if you have questions or comments. And please subscribe on social media and see what I'm up to. Uh, I've got a couple Nat Hab trips coming up this spring. I'll be in Grand Teton and Yellowstone in May, June, and then I'll be in down East Maine, the coastal Maine trip in September, October. So hope to see you on a trip, and thanks for tuning in. And I'll pass it over to Rob for some questions.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Now, before we dive into the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that if you do have questions, you can submit them via the question field in your control panel on the upper right corner. Just hit those three bars. All right, so let's dive into some of these questions. So if one of a monogamous pair passes away, does die, does the remaining one find a new mate?
That's a great question, and I think, that's I don't know the answer to that. It would be really species specific, and potentially even individual specific. The more that we're finding, there's just more depth to individuals than we found before. There are a lot of examples of, I mean, this is a dark space to go into, but there are a lot of examples of roadkill where one of two gets killed, and then the other one is mourning the loss of that individual on the roadside, and that individual gets killed as well. So it's a whole sad world of monogamous relationships in the wildlife kingdom, just as sad as the human kingdom. Good question.
Thank you, Charlie. So let's talk about ravens for a second. Do they vocalize as part of a courtship behavior?
Absolutely. Yeah, ravens have these unbelievable vocalizations, a huge range, and very creative, very individual. Each individual will create a different soundscape, if you will. And their ability to mimic different types of sounds is pretty spectacular too. And that is absolutely part of the equation. I definitely didn't do a full deep dive into ravens. There's so much there. Very, very smart animal.
So this is sort of a general question, but are there any common misconceptions that a person might believe about the courtship of a particular pair of species?
Hmm. I think that there's been an interesting, so like when I went to school and studied biology, that would have been in 22, if you count college years, 2008 to 2013, and then graduate school after that. During that time, I was essentially brought up in uh, this ethos of anthropomorphizing being a really evil word, meaning that if we see emotion in an animal, we're projecting ourselves onto that animal. And in the time since I've graduated, there have been study after study that's come out that's shown that animals actually have greater depth, greater emotional depth, greater capacity to feel than we ever gave them credit for. And I'm always fascinated by kind of shifts in evolutionary or in ecological thinking. And this is one where we're still catching up with, or we're trying to fix this worldview that in early ecology days, I mean, even like 1950s, 1960s ecological thought, it placed humans at the top and were this superior organism in this worldview. And since then, we've, through many different studies, shown that humans are just one amid many species that have high executive function, that have high emotional capacity. And so I think one of our greatest misconceptions is that we vilified people who uh, we used to call anthropomorphize animals. And there's this tension, right? Because the scientific process is based on hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, designing a controlled study to be able to answer a question, to be able to get your theory, right? Because we're never creating facts, we're creating theories. And so I'm really fascinated by how we're going to navigate the next few decades of research because we're trying to cope with the fact that uh, we are not the pinnacle of evolution. We're just one of many. And we have more similarities with other members of the animal kingdom than we thought we did. Um, and so I think the biggest misconception we can have is maybe not giving our counterparts enough credit for their capacity, their emotional capacity, their intellectual capacity. And this, eh, that type of thinking, that type of discussion of animal emotion used to be vilified within the scientific community. And now there are studies that are rigorously designed that are allowing for a more nuanced conversation of uh, what is anthropomorphizing and what is observation of behavior. So I think that's the biggest area for discussion that I'm excited for, and the biggest area for potential misunderstandings um, of what we're looking at when we see animal behavior.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlie. So let's talk about the monarch butterfly for a second. Is it only the female that heads back north, and does the male just stay in Mexico until it dies?
It really depends. So basically, once the monarch butterflies start migrating back north, that's the point where they have shifted away from their wintering body types. They actually go into a different body type that has what we call reproductive diapause. So they shut down all of their reproductive organs, male and female. And then at a certain point in time, triggered by length of day, triggered by temperature, triggered by a number of different environmental things, uh, they regain their ability to reproduce. And at that point, they start reproducing. Once a male that has migrated reproduces, that's so energy intensive that that individual will simply die. So it's possible some males are going to travel with the rest of the butterflies before they mate, but as soon as they do, they're done. And the lifespan of a butterfly is typically very, very short. Uh, Looking at from egg to butterfly being 2 months, about a month from egg to chrysalis, and about a month as an adult. But then in the winter, they expand their lifespan by 4 to 5 times. They last from November, September all the way until March, and still a bit of a mystery of how they do that. But generally, the males are just going to survive up until the point where they regain the ability to reproduce. They gift that spermatophore, and then they're going to die.
Great. Thank you for the answer. So what is it that makes the female bird attracted to the male, and do pheromones play a part in bird breeding?
Hmm. I don't know about pheromones in bird breeding. I haven't heard about that. Pheromones are mostly in mammals and insects, but I'll have to look into that about whether or not that plays a role. Um, Basically, it's more complicated than we can get into, like what actually creates attraction in different species, and it's honestly probably a more in-depth question than we can even get the answer to. It's just that evolutionary pressure has selected for different traits that individuals have. Uh, it's very complicated of an answer, but uh, for instance, like if a female is selecting for males, let's start again. Look at 100 birds, right? 50 females, 50 males. That's a population. We'll just call it a population. If among those females there are 10 females that just so happen to be attracted to males with a slightly more colorful beak, and in that population there are some males with slightly more colorful beaks, and the reason for that is that they actually have better genetics and better diet, um, that's producing that color. The female doesn't necessarily know that inherently. They're just attracted to that color because of their genetic disposition. So it almost feels like random chance, but over the course of time and evolution and multiple generations, if there's a benefit to a difference, that difference will get perpetuated generationally, uh, and if it's genetically connected. So, long answer to your question, it depends.
Gotcha. Thank you. Um, so let's talk about elks. Is it the size of the horns that attracts the female?
Yeah, so for elk antlers, it's a number of things. So with elk, we didn't talk about this. They have this amazing bugle. So the bugle is part of what attracts a female, and then the physical presence of that male, and then their ability to spar and remove another elk. So their rack is one component. Their antlers are one component of what leads to a particular elk being successful. They need to have large antlers to be successful. Typically, larger bulls are going to have larger antlers. Larger bulls are going to have deeper, more impressive bugles. Um, and all of those factors are going to combine. And then in addition to that, elk do have that vomeronasal organ, and they're going to be scenting as well to be able to determine health. And so that goes both ways. Both the male is going to scent the female to see if they're receptive to mating, and the female is going to scent the male to see how healthy they are.
Gotcha. So it's not just size that matters. Good to know.
That's right.
Um, so just for clarity, did you say it was the male bison that would drink the female urine?
It goes all around. If you watch a bison herd during the rut for long enough, you'll see they're all drinking each other's urine. But mostly the male bison will drink the female bison's urine to determine, in particular, if she's pregnant or not pregnant and could be pregnant. So it's a way to determine if she's receptive, because the other aspect there is that female bison who does not want to mate can cause problems as well. She can charge that male. She could potentially puncture him with her horns. So the male wants to make sure that if he approaches a particular individual, that it's timed well, that it's going to be received well.
Thank you for clarifying that. So one last question for you, Charlie. If you could lead any NatHab trip, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. There's so many amazing ones, and I think I don't know enough about all of them to really know. I really love the trips that I guide. They're spectacular places. The monarch butterfly migration is otherworldly. I mean, obviously Yellowstone is otherworldly, and I'm really excited to add on the main trip. It's been a life goal of mine to get to Madagascar to be able to see all the chameleons. But there are so many places in the world that would be amazing to go.
Agreed. Well, Charlie, thank you. Unfortunately, that will be the last question that we do have time for today. I know you're not feeling great, so I'd just like to throw it back to you for any closing comments you may have for us.
Well, thank you all for tuning in today. Had some fun with the topic, and happy Valentine's Day. And thank you, Rob, for hosting.
Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. Now, if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, give us a call at 800-543-8917 or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. If you're part of a photo club and would like NatHab to speak to your members about nature and travel photography, email us at webinars@nathab.com. Join us Monday for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.